What was Henry Kissinger doing in Beijing? Does he matter as a figure anymore?
Well, he certainly matters symbolically, and the Chinese government thinks he matters. His visit there harkens back to more than 50 years ago when he had a visit to China that was really important in paving the way for the US and China to establish diplomatic relations. And he has long been viewed in China as a friend, as an old friend of China, meaning he's able to push for Beijing's interests in Washington, D.C., and in the halls of power in the U.S. And it's interesting, that he not only met with Wang Yi, who's China's top diplomat, he also met with China's defense minister, Li Shangfu, who just a month ago refused a request from the U.S. Secretary of Defense to meet. So you can see that he's really being showered with this warm welcome. He's being given a warmer welcome than US officials. And I think that China's probably trying to show that they're willing to engage with the US, but on terms that are favorable to Beijing.
And the question, I suppose, for everyone, and particularly the US, is that the two biggest challenges facing the world arguably are climate change and AI, or two of the biggest facing the world are those two. And actually, for anything to prosper in those areas, everyone needs to be on the same side. It's a global human crisis we're facing potentially in both of them, certainly in climate change. And therefore, at some point, there needs to be good faith on both sides that everyone's pushing in the same direction. Is that naive to imagine that could ever happen? Or is self-interest always going to stop that from ever becoming true cooperation?
I don't think it's naive. And I think especially as the effects of climate change become more severe, I think that the crisis nature of that may bring people together. But right now, from the perspective of the rivalry between US and China, it does seem like a distant goal. And you can look right now at US policies towards, for example, the sustainable energy or green energy sector, the transition. We are so reliant on so much of that tech and those materials and rare earths on China. And yet lawmakers in the US are trying to shift away from that, which will most certainly slow the green energy transition. But why are they doing that? It's because they fear that the Chinese government is fully aware of its dominance in some of these areas and will use that dominance to push for for further geopolitical influence in the world and to achieve its own narrow national interests. And to kind of step away from this impasse, Beijing needs to basically make assurances that it will not use its dominance in those fields, in those industries, for ways that will harm the US national interest. And the US needs to say to China, we will step away from these restrictions. And that right now looks very difficult.
And presumably to do that as well, China would need to show that it's taking steps to cut its polluting. I mean, I know that it is a big investor, as you say, in renewables. It invests an awful lot in them, but it also invests an awful lot in coal producing factories, and it is the biggest polluter in the world. At some point, it will have to show that that number's coming down, won't it?
Oh, you're exactly right. And what we're seeing is kind of it's a little bit schizophrenic on the side of China, because on the one hand, you have, the Chinese EV market, the electrical vehicle market is the biggest one in the world. And in this year, 25% of auto sales in China are expected to be electric vehicles, which is stunning and is incredibly positive. On the other hand, as you said, we see China still investing in coal mines. Their coal production is not going down. And we've also seen them exporting the building of coal mines and coal energy plants, the exporting the building of coal energy plants to other parts of the world, so that China's own emissions may not look as high, but they're contributing to other countries' emissions. And this is something that the Chinese government, is certainly unwilling to address publicly. And the fact that they are by far the world's largest emitter is something that they're also not willing to at least, publicly address. Instead, they tend to say things like, well, the countries that led the Industrial Revolution, the US, the UK, et cetera, need to make up for their historical emissions. And while that's an understandable position, it's not a functional
No,
position.
no. It doesn't help us where we are now.